So thank you everyone joining us for the COVID-19 and Cancer Virtual Expert Board. Without wasting any time, we'll move on to the expert board. Our moderators are Dr. T.P. Sahu, medical oncologist from Bhopal, and Dr. Amish Vora, medical oncologist from New Delhi. Our expert panelists are Dr. Navneet Singh, pulmonologist from Chandigarh, Dr. Nandita Devekar, anesthetist and intensivist from United Kingdom, Dr. Badira CP, pediatric oncologist from Mumbai, and Dr. Udip Maheshwari, medical oncologist from Mumbai. So, so this is our agenda for the for our second virtual expert board. So I'll now hand it over to our program director, Dr. Puresh Parekh. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. What you see on the screen was the faculty from the previous session, and I request Dr. Amish Vora to give us the summary of what was discussed in the previous session.
Thank you, sir. So this is just a recap of discussions and consensus on 22nd of April. That was our first meeting. It was an amazing learning process, and I hope that we continue to learn from each other. And as Dr. Anta said, that let's hope that very soon we are past this wave. Can I have my next slide, please? So the case what we discussed on 22nd of April is 54-year-old female with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, was started on BFM 90 protocol. Patient became RT-PCR COVID positive on day 23 of induction. Patient was asymptomatic till day 5. She developed fever on day 6. Her C-reactive protein was high, 125. Procal was normal, blood culture was normal, and CBC luckily was suggestive of hematological remission. So this was what the case we discussed. Next slide, please. So few questions which we tried to answer and we tried to reach consensus. Let me tell you, these consensus was based on the panelist and attendees discussion. This will continue to evolve as we discuss more and more cases. But I will just share where did we reach some consensus. So the first question which we asked was, should we admit asymptomatic cancer patients who have active malignancy, especially in this case where there was patient had active acute lymphoblastic leukemia? So the answer is no, we should not admit asymptomatic active cancer patients. If there is no paucity of beds, 1 out of 6 panelists believed that the patient should be admitted, while remaining 5 and majority of the attendees, we had more than 100 people who attended. Everyone believed that patients should not be admitted if it is asymptomatic COVID patient. Next slide, please. Should active cancer treatment be continued, especially in this particular patient? All panelists agreed upon continuing steroids, which is part of induction for ALL. Other induction drugs, that is vincristine, L-asparaginase, intrathecal methotrexate, and daunorubicin, there was no uniform consensus. Vincristine, everybody agreed can be continued. But as regards daunorubicin and L-asparaginase, it was on need basis. Majority of panelists believed daunorubicin should not be continued, while some of the panelists and attendees gave that L-asparaginase can be covered up later on also, so that also can be avoided while patient have active COVID infection. Next slide, please. How should we treat COVID in this patient? So the few drugs which discussed were favipiravir. One of the main argument was in scarcity of beds. Even if favipiravir is working little bit, should we offer to this patient and active cancer patients? So there is no level 1 evidence that favipiravir works in COVID patients, although it is approved by DCGI. There was an intense discussion about what I said. If it reduces viral load and if it reduces symptoms, are we more comfortable? The consensus that not all patients with active malignancy and mildly symptomatic COVID-19 needs favipiravir. The idea is, in case if favipiravir is less in supply and if the patient is asymptomatic, do not rush or do not make patients to rush for favipiravir. Next slide, please. When should remdesivir be given? Within first 5 to 7 days. If patient is on supplemental oxygen in ward with moderate category of COVID infection, I again repeat, supplemental oxygen in ward with moderate COVID category, remdesivir can be considered. For all other patients, remdesivir will not work. All trials consistently have shown that there is no mortality benefit with remdesivir. While specific data of remdesivir in cancer patient was not discussed, as during first wave, there was a cancer consortium from 123 different sites where they also agreed upon that remdesivir is probably one drug, if chosen properly in cancer patients, it shows some benefit. Even there also in 2000 plus patients, there was no statistically significant reduction in mortality, but they found the drug to be useful in this particular group of patients. Next slide, please. What about all other medicines? Doxycycline, ivermectin, 100% of my patients, whether I treat them or whether COVID expert treats them in Delhi, are on these 4-5 drugs. 100% of them. The panelists said there is no consensus. There is no clear data regarding these medicines. So it depends on a person who is treating whether they want to offer them or not. So these were the 5 main questions. There was one 6th question also, which was discussed, that when should we restart chemotherapy? And I think that we can discuss today, as we are discussing, our category of discussion today is mild to moderate COVID infection in cancer patients. Next slide. And this is today's case. Before I hand it over to Dr. Tarini for discussion, this is a 34-year-old female, Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 3BSX. There was a bulky mediastinal mass. Patient was started on ABVD. Between first and second dose, in fact, just before second dose, I do RT-PCR in all cancer patients coming for chemotherapy. Patient was found to be COVID positive. Cycle threshold value was 25. Patient is absolutely asymptomatic. So what next? And Tarini, before you start your vigorous discussion, the first question which I want to ask to all the panelists or everyone, when we prognosticate these patients, because they come running to us first, should we tell them, or do we have sufficient data to tell them that cancer patients on active treatment with COVID positive do badly compared to non-cancer patients? And with that, the ball is in your court, Tarini.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Amish, and thank you, Purveshwar. Yeah, we have the panelists, and yeah, let's discuss what my case was similar. So let's assume and go on with what Dr. Amish told, and it's exactly the same, that we have a patient on chemotherapy, and it was a patient on 3rd cycle, asymptomatic, and turns out to be COVID-19 positive. So Dr. Navneet, here a patient who's asymptomatic. 2 questions. Next, please. Next. Yeah. Because let's look at practicality. Dr. Amish works where he gets a RT-PCR report in few hours. That's what he told in the discussion. But in the reality, most of us get a RT-PCR report. If I send it today, I get it after 48 hours. So all of us, lot of us depend upon the rapid antigen test. We agree that 50% versus 70%, that debate will be there. So my point to you, because you are a pulmonologist, also deal with lung cancer, is it fair for us, for asymptomatic patient who doesn't have cough, who doesn't have fever, I do a rapid antigen test which picks up around 50%. But one more question along with that, if you can answer it, and someone else can also take it up. I have seen in my practice, the rapid antigen is there, which is picking up more cases. In the first wave, I just picked up 40 odd cases. I was pulling up my data in 4 months or 5 months of my doing this test. Now I pick up at least 30 to 40% of my OPD patients on rapid antigen to turning out to be positive, asymptomatic, symptomatic, all cases put together. So Dr. Naveed, 2 questions. is rapid antigen test because that I need not wait asymptomatic patient, fine, and I can go ahead with that? That is first question to you.
Okay, so I mean, my experience has been slightly different. I have not been mandating a COVID test prior to chemotherapy. When there have been very high periods of transmission, like currently going on, we have forewarned patients that you might want to test for SARS-CoV-2 by RT-PCR before coming here. We have told them that if it turns out to be positive, we will not be administering chemotherapy on that day. However, it's only a percentage of patients who actually got the RT-PCR and came. So a lot of them probably did not want to interrupt their chemotherapy because they were asymptomatic and they did not get tested, and because there is no mandate to test them necessarily. So the people who were positive, obviously, whether it was picked up incidentally or because they were symptomatic, chemotherapy, I believe, should not be given because you are giving or you are furthering lower their immunity, and that and cancer itself is an immune suppressed state per se. So and we don't want somebody to be developing.
So basically, the idea I'm getting is you are not mandating any form of COVID test for your patients who come for chemotherapy.
No, so we are recommending it, but we don't mandate it.
Okay, so we'll stop here, and that discussion goes to a very important, interesting scenario. Dr. Udip, if I can bring you here, and then Dr. Badira. Do you feel it's a fair thing to do it at this point? Because there is the community transmission, all of us agree to that point. And if they're asymptomatic, many people are hesitant for the test. Would it be okay not to test everyone who at least is due for chemotherapy? Second, you are anyway admitting in them to daycare. There would be chances that they would be infect other patients who would be in the adjoining bed. So 2 questions, Dr. Udip and then Dr. Badira. Can you take it?
Hi, sir. Good evening, everyone. So I think I agree to some extent with Dr. Navni. So as a community oncology and as a practitioner who practices in community and has daycare centers with single rooms, so we maintain all from the first wave that was there. We have maintained that we are not testing asymptomatic patients, and we have not tested in the first round as well. And from the data that I have currently, the patients who are not tested, only one of the patient has died. She was obese, had diabetes, had hypothyroid, and was on adjuvant therapy for breast cancer. She was the only patient that has died.
So you don't test. That's the impression I'm getting. Only for symptomatic you do that testing. Dr. Badira, what's your call on that? Because I have been doing it for every of my patient who is eligible for chemotherapy and due for chemo. She's there? Dr. Amish, you can come in because this is very divergent of what you are, and this actually is something that's interesting, that 50% at least of the panel feels strongly that they feel that it may be okay to do it, but they don't mandate it and they do not impose it on the patients.
Yeah, so I do agree with Dr. Udip. So for us also as a policy, we are not testing all patients. We are testing only symptomatic patients. Even if that meant new patients or patients currently on therapy, we are testing only.
So what happens? Are you not worried about the transmission that can happen?
So I think at the level where we are with the community transmission, the odds of you getting the virus from the hospital or from anywhere, even if you are cancer chemotherapy patients, are the same. The most important thing to underline here is to maintain social distancing, to maintain, have a mask. You whatever chemotherapy you are getting, you have to have a good N95 or a 3-ply mask or have a double mask, and that's what is going to prevent you, and hand washing or hand sanitizing for that matter. That is what is going to prevent you from getting or contracting COVID, even if be in the daycare or while they are traveling.
Dr. Amish, your thoughts on that? Because the panel overwhelmingly feels the other way.
I don't agree with all the panelists, but I'm sure each to their own. It all depends on the prevalence also. Right now, the second wave, the positivity rate, if treated properly, is 30 to 35%. Consistently across wherever there is increase in that. So that means what we are looking at, first of all, we are not even diagnosing the carriers. Asymptomatic COVID positive patient can infect many others if they are not isolated or if they are not seen properly. One. Second thing is, consistently across, we have loads of publication, and I went through many of them, where in the first wave, they have analyzed their data and published in November, December of 2020. I'm sure second wave publications will follow now. In everywhere, wherever there was an asymptomatic patients, in fact, ESMO 2020 has excellent poster from Germany that asymptomatic patients, they have not offered chemotherapy or immunotherapy, and there was a delay of approximately around 30 to 40 days. And they have found that even after that delay, there was no impact on the patient receiving the treatment.
Okay.
So on one side, yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think we'll have two opinions. One from Dr. Nandita, although she is not not doing this practice of oncology, but does she have an idea of what's happening in UK? And then Dr. Purvesh, I think, sir, should come in and then put on a point, because I feel this is a very important issue, and I never expected a divergence in opinion in this question itself. Please, Dr. Nandita first.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. Hi. Yeah, I have discussed this with my consultant hematologist friends before, and they do the testing in all the patients before coming into hospital, because we don't want to. That's one of the things, because again, the Kent variant was highly transmissible. So then other people catching COVID from these asymptomatic, patients was very high, and we wanted to completely avoid that. So that's what I spoke to her before this. And the other thing is, they do delay the treatment if they are
fair of what me and Amish was speaking. Dr. Purvesh sir, and I think then Navneet can come in, and then we move on to the next question. Dr. Purvesh sir, what do you feel now? We are having a divergence and dichotomy in the views itself in the first question.
In an ideal world, I think we should do the test.
Okay.
And as you have, and Nandita has clearly mentioned, that there is a risk of an asymptomatic carrier transmitting the infection and causing serious problems. What happens in large centers like Tata Hospital or in PGI Chandigarh is that the patient load is so much, and they're totally overwhelmed, that then they have to, decide what should be the policy based on their circumstances.
Okay.
So I think that is what reason for divergence.
So point to take home, I'll just stop this discussion at this part here is, ideal world, you would like to test for everyone who's due for chemotherapy. Dr. Navneet also pointed out that they do not want to immunocompromise already immunocompromised patient, but because of the other logistics and other issues, people do practice and do not test asymptomatic. I think that's fair, and I think we'll stop here and move forward. There's a chat box, there's a question that if they come across a RT-PCR which is negative, but a patient symptomatic, what do you do? I think you you do a CT scan, probably you can do that if you are very much eager to do that, or you repeat a test again in a second RT-PCR, and that's probably the way I would hold on for a really symptomatic patient in this time and not just give him chemotherapy. That's my take on it. Dr. Navneet, what would you do for such a patient? Came down symptomatic, has a RT-PCR report 2 days back, and it is negative. Would you hold for this patient at least chemotherapy, repeat RT-PCR, or do HRCT test? Dr. Navneet?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I told, now there is a scenario, the patient has come for chemo, but he or she is mild to moderately symptomatic, has cough and fever for 3 to 4 days, come with a RT-PCR negative report to you 2 days back. So would you give chemo, or would you do a repeat RT-PCR and a CT scan?
No, so that is very clear. No. Even when we did not have COVID, somebody with any infection anywhere, whether it's a respiratory tract infection or a soft tissue or a urine infection, we don't give chemotherapy. And so in this patient who has a respiratory tract infection, whether it turns out to be COVID or it doesn't turn out to be COVID, there is no question of giving chemotherapy.
Okay, so that question is answered. That was in the chat. The second point is, should you be repeating for every cycle? I think the answer is very clear. Yes, in the ideal world, yes. That's what was there. So now coming to CT values, because Dr. Roshni picked it up, and she also has chatted already. She's active, and she has chatted that RAT is not available in Jabalpur. I think it should be available. It's a very easy test. Even small hospitals do it. So I think that should be available. She can look around. But coming to CT values, and I want to bring in with Dr. Udip can you have a little bit to comment on CT values, because I know Navneet will have this last word on this. So CT values, I'm not talking of CT scans. I'm talking of on the RT-PCR.
I know. So the RT-PCR CT values, I think, are overstated.
What is the importance? Would you look at it, and what's the importance in oncology?
So basically, I don't look at it too keenly. But the data says that the lower the CT scans, the more the viral infection load. Okay. And higher the so it also depends on the day what we do the PCR test. If we do it on a later date, the CT
agreed. Any day. What is the take-home message for CT? Dr. Navneet, can you have it just take-home message, a single liner, and then we move on?
I don't care about the CT value.
No.
Tarini,
okay.
Tarini, so, can I say?
Yeah, please.
Agree, please.
So Tarini, again, I think today is my day of little going against the tide.
That is the good thing about panels. The divergence comes.
ICMR just recently has come out with the saying that between 35 to 40, the RT-PCR machine can take up to 40 cycles, and between 35 to 40, those who are positive should be taken as negative. And there are studies consistently done that above 30 CT value, between 30 to 35 cycles, the machine will report as positive, but above 30, patient is not infective to others. These are also studies done. This is clinically extremely helpful in asymptomatic COVID cancer patients positive with CT value of 32. Right now, I have one patient, completed 10 days, absolutely asymptomatic. I was relaxed. There's the only one patient where I have not given anything to that patient. And patients are absolutely fine. So I think CT value helps us. I don't think below 25, when the rapid antigen also becomes positive, below 25, I agree with Dr. Navneet that it has got no bearing on clinical outcome, but CT value higher has a clinical significance.
Okay, so basically the CT value is more about the infectivity to others. The lesser the CT value, the chances the viral load is so much that it picks up on the number of cycles of RT-PCR is lesser done. And the higher it is, as Dr. Amish told, then probably the negative reports comes beyond 35, and the higher it is, the lesser the viral load. That's where I think we will stop. I think if there's nothing much more pressing, because this was question I think Dr. Roshni asked, if she has something, she can just ask in the chat, and otherwise I'll go on to the next slide. Please, next slide, please. Yeah. So now how do we proceed for this case? Let's say the Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was done by Dr. Amish and me, the breast cancer. This was a 68 years old lady. Should we be admitting her? Dr. Badira, let's say it is a young patient of yours, you are a pediatric oncologist, may not be dealing with adult, but per se, do you think asymptomatic, because you don't test, you told, but somehow you have tested and the patient is asymptomatic, but once your test report, I hope you would not be giving chemotherapy if the test report is there with you. So would you be admitting this patient?
So for the Hodgkin's patient who's on ABBD chemotherapy due for her next chemo, where you are not expecting any otherwise okay patient, asymptomatic, no, will not be admitting. If you have facilities for home isolation, it will be home isolation.
Any patient profile you would be admitting?
So for children, if you look at children part, those who are on intensive myelosuppressive chemotherapy.
Okay.
Suppose you have an induction patient or an AML post 777 or HIDAC patient, or a patient on an LMB protocol, Copadam or CYBV, such an intensive or a relapse acute leukemia patient who's on intensive chemotherapy, where we expect them to be cytopenic, and such patients those who are in requirement of a chemo, like an induction patient where we might need to give them BCR if they are asymptomatic.
So basically, basically you're pointing out that there's expected nadir of the chemotherapy of the cytopenia to happen.
Who are cytopenic on intensive myelosuppressive chemotherapy, where other complications can also chip in. Those patients will admit at least for the first week if they are asymptomatic also, to see how it is going. If they are fairly stable,
So that's what
Tarini. So what Dr. Badira is saying is that asymptomatic potential neutropenic patients.
Yeah, that's what I told. Expected to have a nadir of the counts because of the chemotherapy schedule which they have taken.
So, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, it also matters what type of chemotherapy they are. I mean, normal chemo, which is even neutropenic, we will not admit. But myelosuppressive, intensive like induction and AML chemo, those patients.
Agreed. So, Dr. Navneet, in your practice, do you feel or do you recommend to the house that we should be admitting this asymptomatic patient for solid cancers?
No.
No. The clear answer is no. And
Absolutely.
I read from the chat, you told the CT values is as good as ESR. So that's what your chat was. So you have been very harsh on the CT values. Dr. Udip, do you, because I don't feel you would be doing that also.
No, so we are not
Okay.
admitting.
Coming to the next question. You have a report, you don't do it. You have a report of a patient who walks down RT-PCR done because they have to come to the Mumbai from outside and they get the report if it's positive. What investigation would you do for a perfectly asymptomatic patient? The question is very clear.
Me? You're asking me? Sir?
Yeah, sure. You.
Yeah, so so I think an asymptomatic patient who is due for chemotherapy, we don't do any investigations if the patient is asymptomatic. We just delay it for 4 to 7 days, revisit her symptoms at 4 to 7 days. If the patient becomes symptomatic, then we do the test of basic. I get.
So for you, it's no symptoms.
No,
it is no test at all.
No test at all. Observe at 3rd day and the 7th day. That is what I usually follow.
Dr. Badira, for a non-leukemic or maybe a lymphoma patient who has come down to you asymptomatic, not on very intensive protocol.
No, we will not. I agree with Dr.
You just ask them to come after 7 days.
Yes, 4 to 7 days. Yes, correct. We will not be doing any investigations at that point of time, and we'll revisit again after 1 week. And if stable, we'll decide regarding the further chemo. And
Dr. Navneet, any difference in your opinion?
So even for healthcare workers currently, the new AIMS recommendation is 10 days. So in my opinion, 7 days is too early because you still have had the infection and the time to clear of the infection is probably going to be 7 days plus minus 3 days. So I would give at least 10 days before deciding any initiation of treatment. And if you have an elderly with comorbidities, I would wait at least 2 weeks, even if he or she were asymptomatic.
Okay, so I can ask one more question. If a patient is already asymptomatic, hang on, Dr. Navneet, it's for you. If asymptomatic RT-PCR positive, you just tell them to come after 10, 12, 14 days. Do you again ask for a RT-PCR for these patients who already had a positive report?
So typically, as per guidelines, RT-PCR need not be repeated. However, cancer is an immunosuppressed state. So, I mean, it is, we cannot go in variance with government guidelines. We just ask them to keep in touch with the local COVID monitoring team because all patients are supposed to be reported to their local COVID teams. Okay. And if they are quarantined for 17 days anyway, which is the current policy, then there is really no need to test for RT-PCR. However,
so if you are doing it early, you will be little inclined to do a repeat test.
Probably yes, but again, there is no mandate to doing it.
Dr. Amish, we are getting little bit divergence because this panel.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please. See,
the RT-PCR will also take time to clear. So just because you have repeated the test and it's still positive, I mean, it doesn't mean anything. I agree with him that when he says that when you have comorbid, it's better to wait for the 2nd week to go through and then take your patients up for chemotherapy.
No, there is
not enough to wait.
And I that's why I also had a very surprise with the thing that 7 days and then you repeat.
No, it's too short.
Yeah, that is too short. So I think 2 weeks was a fair idea, but there is a little divergence in this part of it. The larger institutes like TMH, what we got from Dr. Chetan was they wait for a week. Even I think one of our two other members told that 1 week. Dr. Amish.
So I would like to clear that we do a repeat RT-PCR test in all those who are confirmed positive on RT-PCR, and we do it at 14 days.
Dr. Parikh is there and he can play because that's what was told and that this need not be repeated. Dr. Purvesh sir.
So again, I think I'm not sure I remember what Chetan said, but definitely repeating after 2 weeks is, I think, a very reasonable thing.
So after 1 week, we just see about the decision for chemotherapy. If they are on like intensive chemotherapy, if they are stable, no symptoms, asymptomatic, otherwise okay to proceed with something like an induction, we'll take a decision. Otherwise, we'll defer it for a 1 or 2 weeks, but we do a repeat test on day 14.
Okay,
that's very fair. Very fair.
Okay, so Dr. Amish, little bit of difference is coming in now.
Again, so here there's two things out of my own experience and what the guidelines mention. Out of my own experience, here again, the CT value helps. If, like, I had one patient who's again non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, required treatment because B symptoms, patient CT value was 31. I repeated after 10 days, patient became RT-PCR negative. I started on chemotherapy and patient is fine, 4 cycles over right now. But having said that, we all have had patients where, as Dr. Roshni mentioned, the dead viral particles linger on and they multiply in RT-PCR and they give you as a false positive result. So I think as an oncology community, if the patient is absolutely asymptomatic, and the current guidelines and the AIMS guideline also, what it mentions that after 14 days, and Tarini, we discussed during last time also the same thing. Yeah. That after 14 days, if patient is asymptomatic, solid tumor, absolutely fine, blood works are, if they are done normal, why do we want to repeat RT-PCR? Let's move on with the life. That is what I think we discussed last time also.
So 2 weeks is the cutoff where we all feel comfortable for asymptomatic. That's what even all of us are pointing towards. You may or may not repeat as per the practice where you do. So that will stop there and just go on. Dr. Nandita, do you feel that your colleagues in the UK, do they repeat the RT-PCR for a positive patient, then give chemo? I know that you would not be directly dealing with this patient. Any idea?
Yeah. I think they do repeat RT-PCR after 14 days. That's what.
Then only they get a negative report, they want to go ahead with it.
Yes, unless it is very urgent, and that depends upon their discussion at MDT. But
agree.
Apart from that, it is.
But that's what the Western literature pointing out towards a negative.
Yes.
Report. Okay. Yeah. And next, please. Yeah. So CT scan versus X-ray. Those all who told no investigations at all. Dr. Amish, you are very proactive. Do you do a CT scan or X-ray for asymptomatic, or you do not do any investigations at all?
Asymptomatic solid tumor, there is no investigations at all till the time patient finds first symptom. If the patient does not have any symptoms, nothing doing.
Anyone in the chat box also can come in, because we will have the things which we did as a questionnaire and 3 days back, and that answers will be very different from how confidently the panel is unanimous on few things. Next one.
Is there any medical legal issue in not doing a CT? I mean, I'm just asking, in this kind of,
so, I got it. And let's go to Dr. Udeep first, and then Navneet will come in. Is there a medical legal issues of not doing a radiological test, especially CT scan, for every COVID positive patient?
So I think in the first wave, there was a medical legal issue in doing a RT-PCR for asymptomatic patients. We had got noticed, why are you doing RT-PCR? I don't think there is any medical legal issue, otherwise vice versa. In asymptomatic patients with no chest symptoms, nothing, we are not justified to do a CT scan.
Dr. Navneet, your last word on this? Is there any hassle of not doing it?
Again, so I will agree with him. You cannot mandate an RT-PCR or a COVID testing for an asymptomatic patient because there is no data on that.
No,
secondly,
if the patient is positive, do you do a CT scan?
I know. I was just repeating that. Yeah. So similarly, for an asymptomatic person, there is no mandate to do an imaging. You can do it if you want, but you cannot force it. So, and suppose the patient says, I want to get a CT scan and he's asymptomatic, you can clearly explain that you may not need a CT scan.
What do you do?
Right? I don't. If an asymptomatic, you just tell them that once your COVID care team has said that you can be out of your house, because typically it is 17 days now. So once you are clear to get out of your home after 17 days, you contact us by teleconsultation and we will give you the next appointment for chemotherapy.
Okay, so done. So that question is loud and clear. I think, Roshni, we have got the answer. There is no legality. You would not be put down for the not doing a scan. You have science behind you, and all the experts are saying the same thing. Even the AIMS guidelines also are with us now. I think that we are strong on the legal ground. So now coming to Dr. Badira. Any patient, I think you are in a pediatric part, but would you be giving anything for a patient who has walked down, because you don't do it routinely? For patients who has walked down with a positive report, how do you give them? What medications you give them, or you just tell go home and come after 10 to 15 days, depending upon what malignancy you are dealing with?
Yes, exactly. We do the same. There is nothing started for this. We don't start any other medications.
Okay.
Just monitor the SATs, just monitor your temperature. If there is anything, come SOS or come on the time. According to the malignancy, they'll be called, and according to the counts or expected counts to fall, we might call them for investigations accordingly.
Dr. Udip, same, or you do something, you write some vitamins, some
No, nothing.
Okay, Dr. Udip, what's your...
Yes, we do add ivermectin and doxycycline in patients who are on chemotherapy. Otherwise,
you do add ivermectin and doxycycline. Do you have any guideline? Do you have any evidence based, or it's the guideline because it's written, you just do it?
So it's not evidence based. Obviously, there are no data to say that these things help. But yes, we do add based on the in community practice in oncology everywhere, because these patients will ultimately go to a COVID specialist in Mumbai, and most of the COVID specialists are in these.
Okay.
So Dr. Udip has a very important point, Tarini. Last week,
I you have the last word on this, because that's very
not
important.
that. I want Dr. Parikh to be last word on this.
Okay.
What Dr. Udip is saying, I face exactly. Last 3 of my prescriptions did not have favipiravir.
And that was added on when they went to a specialist.
That was added because I normally tell all patients that, look, I look from my perspective, but have a COVID expert. Okay. All of them said, Baba, tum cancer patient of favipiravir shuru kar. So this is something, how do we tackle this?
Okay, so we will discuss that for 2 minutes. Dr. Nandita, what is the practice in UK? Before I come to Navneet, and Dr. Purvesh will end it.
So we don't use favipiravir and ivermectin here in UK at all. Okay. Antibiotics, it then depends on the hematologist or the oncologist, but generally not if
so
they are
procalcitonin is normal. Any
no, generally not. They keep just on, they ask them to monitor their symptoms.
Okay, that's fine. So, Dr. Navneet, now your call.
Why would you want to give a drug or drugs which have no proven efficacy and which can cause drug interaction with other ongoing drugs and cause other problems? Why not let the body recover of the infection of its own? I mean, I see no reason that if you don't write a drug, that is going to be written by somebody else, and so you have to write that drug. That makes no sense to me. I am sorry.
Okay, that's fair. That's a fair point. And I totally take your point and agree to that. Dr. Purvesh sir, and let the chat box come in, because this is something very, very different from what the survey will show us now.
So if you look at the level 1 evidence, there is no level 1 evidence. Okay. But sir, anyway, there is hardly any evidence in cancer patients particularly. There are a few trials. I mean, there are a few collection of data, not trials, which have shown. I believe that a cancer patient is at a higher risk of severe infection or dying of COVID. So I feel that there is a scientific basis to start these patients on antibiotics or ivermectin. Okay. But the decision has to be on a case-to-case basis. If I feel that the patient was treated 3 years ago, he's in complete remission,
even for
right now on not active treatment, I will not give. No, not for asymptomatic patients.
So we are talking asymptomatic here.
So my apologies. I thought we were talking.
No, totally asymptomatic. So you would not give it. That's what you are telling, because it's an asymptomatic patient. Sir, you are stuck. For the first time, I see you stuck. Because I've never seen such network failing.
So true. Parikh sir's screen never freezes.
Yeah, I know. That's something we can always have a screenshot of this. So
Ashish, what did you do?
So this is something very interesting. Can you go on, please? By the time sir comes back. Next slide, please. Yeah. So vitamins we have discussed. I think there is nothing of a value. That's what the experts told. Next.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please, Roshni.
If the drug does not help in reducing the viremia or the infectivity to others, then there is no basis for giving a drug, and we need to explain to our patients.
Okay, that's very clear. So this is very interesting, these things, and all of you should look into that. Very different from what we have been getting as a consensus in the panel now. So that we did a thing. I think 60 or 70 odd answered this. I would have loved to have more answers on this. So around more than 50% of us are now forced to treat COVID patients, either alone or with a COVID specialist. Next slide, please. Yeah. In a solid tumor, this is a very clear solid tumor, now becoming COVID positive is asymptomatic. What will you do? And it is all across. People, most of them have told, only 25% felt that we would do what the panel told, 22 to 25%, that they would not do anything. Just go ask the patient to come after 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 17 days, as Dr. Navneet told. But majority of the respondents felt that they will intervene. Let it be a simple blood marker, let it be something. Even few patients have gone on to, few doctors have gone on to tell that they will do a CT scan also, and that is around a quarter of it, not an insignificant number. So Dr. Navneet, do you feel your referral base, you see these things happening in the reality? Although on the stage we might speak something very different.
So I am in a very unique scenario. I treat lung cancer and I'm a pulmonologist. So I don't get. So I'm sorry?
It's same with solid tumors. So with the referrals from outside, do you see the people have already done all the investigation by the time they come to you?
No. So patients inform us that they have tested COVID positive, and we just tell them that, okay, if you are asymptomatic, stay put, follow the advice of your local COVID treating unit, because every district has a COVID treating unit. We don't interfere what they are doing. If they are giving vitamin C, zinc, we just let them, we just say, once you are done, you covered, you come back.
Dr. Badira, your take on this survey, because this is from medical oncologists.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the blue people. So I think a lot of unnecessary, I mean, investigations are being done. I think we should, I mean, I think this board and these meetings are for that, that this should go out to the greater community, that we needn't do all these things in an otherwise asymptomatic patients.
Dr. Amish, your take on this?
I agree with Dr. Badira that this meeting we are keeping for that larger purpose only, Tarini, and I think it should go across wherever we can disseminate this knowledge, that please don't over investigate COVID patients.
Okay, that's good. Next slide, please.
Sometimes patients are themselves coming with all the tests done because they have ordered the test themselves.
I understand.
And secondly, there may be no access to a COVID helpline in most of these small places.
Yeah, agreed. But I think all of us, most of us are over investigating, and that's the purpose of the meeting, was to tell that we need to categorize the patient and then investigate.
Yeah.
Agree. So for a patient who had a solid tumor, asymptomatic, again, CRP, ferritin, because you have done. Now, Dr. Udip, the patient already again has done the investigations, has come to you. There was a raised CRP, raised ferritin. And would you ask the patient on a teleconsultation to repeat it, to look at the values which is lower, or you tell nothing doing, come at the day 14? What is your quick yes or no?
So, sir, I will definitely not do anything, not intervene. I will call them. So my point is,
you have a high value.
So it's a high value. If the patient is still asymptomatic, I usually call my patients or do a video consult to them at day 3 and day 8. Day 7, day 8 to see
and look at the symptoms. That's what you're doing.
Yes, that's what. So if symptomatically they are okay, beyond day 8, I don't bother doing anything.
Dr. Navneet, any different opinion, or we move on this?
So has anybody tested CRP and ferritin levels in the normal flu and other things which people used to get?
No.
I don't know. So if we don't know whether those influenza or other respiratory illnesses had raised CRP and ferritin, why do you want to extrapolate it to asymptomatic COVID? I don't see why it should be done. And if it has been done and the patient was asymptomatic and he's going to spend 17 days in quarantine as per national policy, there is no need to do anything.
Okay, fair. The idea is very loud and clear. We need to change our practice, and that is something what we need to be very, very clear on. Next. So now we go down to this. This will skip. Next. Okay, this is something very interesting. And all the panelists told we would not be treating with anything. Home isolation is 90%. That means they do not admit. The 10% who are admitting have not answered. But if you look at it, there are 10% approximately who would even recommend a steroid for a patient who's asymptomatic. I think this really gives us how the practice is very different from evidence. And this really gives us that it is all across. Favipiravir is there in 13 to 15%, ivermectin around 35% of cases, remdesivir even people have tried to give it in asymptomatic patients, antibiotic as usual. Dr. Navneet, I want to ask you, because, and I'll ask Dr. Nandita here, a very different thing. Where would you recommend antibiotics in a COVID, irrespective of the status? Is it because of the prolactin level is high, or would you, in your practice, because in India antibiotics are given empirically, you do it that way?
We generally give if the PCT is high. That's where
okay, Dr. Nandita, you only give with the prolactin is high. That's what you told.
And if, of course, if what happens to us when they come to critical, when they come to critical care, many of them, if they have some cap or something, they're already started. But if the prolactin, then we set the PCT, and if the PCT is normal, we stop it. But some people will not be happy to do that.
Can I ask Dr. Nandita one thing? How do you interpret the procalcitonin and CKD or cardiac patients?
Depends again upon what their symptoms are. If we have a general criteria, we actually keep the same. If the procalcitonin is very high, we continue it. But if there's a certain limit, then we stop it. What do you do,
Dr. Navneet? Yeah.
No, I wanted the guideline actually, that what is the level of procalcitonin in CKD or heart patients, where it can have significance versus no significance.
Dr. Navneet, can you answer that?
So I mean, if you're talking of cancer plus CKD.
Cancer plus CKD, CLL, ibrutinib, something.
Well, that's a very, very high risk group anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
And for such high risk group, you may have to individualize all management protocols.
Yeah. So I think that's the first answer you'll get in this scenario. But only thing that comes out here is we probably are overrun. We are fearful. We probably are, lot of times we do not get to know what the evidence would be. We just want to practice what we have seen as a prescription coming from other two physicians who are treating COVID. And we just want to extrapolate and just practice that. I think we need to stop this, and this data is very clear about that. Next.
Tarini.
Yeah,
Tarini,
please. Yeah.
If such patient comes to you in your OPD where steroids are already being started by one COVID expert, so-called COVID expert in the community, would you stop it?
See, if I'm individually myself, I stop it. And but I write it down that this is my opinion, and I write it on the file. But the final opinion will just stop on, because see, you will be antagonizing people in the reality. So you have to tread the middle path. You have to be also legally right. So I write it down. I would not be okay with that. But the patient can go back to the primary doctor and ask a re-opinion. And that's
so. Can I interrupt here?
Yeah.
You can look at the timing from diagnosis at which steroids have been started.
Yes.
So if it has been just second day and steroids have been started for asymptomatic, you can stop it because it can actually worsen the non-COVID. However, if the patient is at day 5 or day 6 and somebody has started it,
asymptomatic also, you still want to give it?
I don't want to give it. I was just telling that, okay, you want to maintain some good IPRs and all that. And so I was just telling that. But if somebody's at asymptomatic and day 2, you can very well stop it because it can cause harm.
Okay, we can move on.
Tarini, this is contradictory to one of the consensus, and that's why oncology is different from general COVID population.
The consensus what we had was on acute leukemia, ALL, which had steroid in its protocol.
That's what I'm saying. ALL everybody agreed that steroid should be continued irrespective of COVID just being diagnosed. What I'm trying to say that, that's why oncology is slightly different. I agree with you, and I agree with all the consensus statement what have been given so far. But it becomes, as Dr. Navneet said, it becomes very difficult in a private practice on day 7 when somebody comes with steroid in asymptomatic patient to stop steroid so confidently.
EP, I want to say something.
You can always sort of taper it earlier. So even if you don't want to stop it and you want to maintain your IPRs, you can say that, okay, you can take steroids, but I would recommend tapering it off faster or something like that. I mean, I don't know. I don't face that scenario. So you people.
No, the move on. The question that was asked last time was that if you are already on steroids for a leukemia protocol, people told that you just continue. And if you are already, this is a question of starting steroids. So these are very two different questions.
EP, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
See, I agree with Navneet what he's saying. If the patient comes on day 5 with steroids, just wait for that day 7 day, and just monitor your CRP on every 3rd day. Once CRP is going down, stop. But if patient is coming within the first week, say less than 5 days, and there is no role of you can clearly tell them stop.
Okay. So,
yeah. Unless you have moderate to severe COVID, there is no role for steroids also. So in
Agreed.
such case, yeah, it should not be used, because especially if you have a high risk, a high profile patient where the chances of infection and the morbidities are more higher. I mean, it should be judiciously used also, but on a timely manner, in a timely.
I totally second and third you. That's what I'm really speaking all about. Okay, next slide, please. Can move to the next slide. Yeah. So now we move on to a lung case. This is a mild symptomatic. So we exactly everything is same. We have now the patient on chemotherapy with GCSF, 3rd cycle, and this patient is a mildly symptomatic. Next slide, please. Yeah. So just a very quick answer. Dr. Badira, mildly symptomatic, any patient except for acute leukemia or high dose chemotherapy, would you admit a mildly symptomatic, or you treat very similarly as asymptomatic?
So for because we are testing only symptomatic, even if it mildly symptomatic fever patients on active chemotherapy who are actually cytopenic or going to be cytopenic, we will admit them to watch how they are.
You admit patients who are mildly symptomatic, even, and those who are on chemotherapy, irrespective of cytopenia, or if they have low counts?
Yes, so cytopenia. I mean, if we are expecting cytopenia or they are cytopenic, we admit, because because in our patients also the existence of FN also is neutropenic and bacterial sepsis are also high on such. So until
I assume that if you're admitting them, then you will be also investigating and doing the basic panel of investigation.
Yes.
Okay. So Dr. Udip, your take on this? So, Roshni, just we will have it just after finish. Dr. Udip, what is your take? Asymptomatic and now mildly.
In an ideal setting with all the healthcare facilities.
So what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah, so I in current situations, I don't admit. I look at their CRP and D-dimer level.
So here you investigate them, even if they're mildly symptomatic.
The lung cancer patient with symptoms, fever, and I have seen patients worsening within 2 to 3 days and succumbing to their illness. And some of these rapid people that we lose can be picked up if there is a high CRP or high D-dimer. I tend to admit those patients, and even in current situations, there is no way we can keep the patient on at home care, because these patients in urgency will not get a bed. So
so you admit them. Dr. Navneet, your take, very different from others, or do you do same as you do for asymptomatic?
So patients will not come to us if they are symptomatic and positive. We will just get informed by teleconsultation that they have tested positive, and so we would recommend that they approach their nearest COVID care unit. Typically, before this surge started, they would have been admitted at some point, and they would have had investigations.
No, but I have little difference in. Would you put your foot down and commit that if a patient comes down to you, a lung cancer patient, mildly symptomatic, only mild fever and cough, nothing that goes into moderate to severe category, would you admit the patient at point number 1, or if you tell please go home, isolate yourself, that's point number 2, or if you admit, would you investigate also?
If again it's going, this was what, 68-year-old or something?
Yeah, 68 years old.
And other comorbidities?
Nothing.
Well, 68 and NSCLC on chemotherapy, I would probably admit her.
You will probably admit her. And Dr. Amish, and then you can take on the question which you had told, which is interesting question. You can also discuss that. Dr. Amish.
No admission.
No admission.
Mildly asymptomatic, but mildly symptomatic patients. But as Dr. Udip said, I would do investigations on this patient minus CT scan again.
Okay, minus CT scan. Dr. Nandita, your colleagues in UK, mildly symptomatic cancer patients or immunocompromised. Let's put the immunocompromised. Do they admit?
I think they will investigate for sure. Whether they would
Okay.
admit or not, I don't know. I'll have to find out.
Okay, okay. So basically now we are little diverging up that for a mildly symptomatic, because the immunocompromised special situation, not as per the guidelines which is there, we would investigate them, because the AIMS guideline, which is for normal COVID, does not mandate investigation. So this is something different. Few of
There is
yeah, I'll just put off and then you continue. And then the admission becomes also that half of us or majority of us feel that admission might be required because they can deteriorate sometimes very fast. And also there's a concern for beds. Now, Dr. Amish, and you can do the discussion.
There are plethora of publications in November and December of 2020, even up to February 2021. Before that, as Dr. Parikh said, there were a lot of papers that cancer patients have increased mortality, but mildly asymptomatic to asymptomatic. Now we have at least from 10 different regions of the world where they have said that they don't do any way different from other non-cancer patients. And there is a data, very strong data of that. So I don't think that just the word immunocompromised we should be afraid of that. It should be case to case basis.
Yeah, I would also like to chip in. So even for our patients, pediatric patients, I'm saying we did not have like increased morbidity or respiratory support in our patients who were on active intensive myelosuppressive chemotherapy. So our mortality a bit high because they had a lot of other bacterial superimposed infections. So COVID per se, due to that, our mortality has not, if you say direct COVID related, would be not more than the normal population.
So we'll go a little quickly because we have 5 more minutes and GCSF is the issue which we wanted to discuss. That Dr. Roshni, quickly, if you want to make a point, and then
same
Dr.
question, GCSF, have we changed our guidelines?
Yeah, we will. We will come to that in 5 minutes. Dr. Amish, any last word you wanted to speak about an interesting question? You mentioned the chat.
I think Udeep wants to say something.
Yeah,
so my point was that I agree with Dr. Amish for admission also, because in an ideal situation I would not admit those patients, but currently with the scarcity of bed, this patient is likely to turn up at 2 in the night and call you and ask you to arrange bed.
Okay,
so
I agree. So basically science does not support it, but logistics you would be looking at that also. That's what it is. Okay, next slide please. Next, we'll just skip this. Next, yeah, we have discussed this. I think now a simple, quick, Navneet and then Udeep. Would you give now antiviral, because you told Udeep you will give it in asymptomatic? I think you will give something.
Yeah. So in patients with fever,
yes, Dr. Navneet, quick yes or no?
Yes.
But if this patient was being admitted, I would do a CT scan and look if she has pneumonitis or not, and then take a decision.
Okay, if no pneumonitis or a very mild pneumonitis, less than 10% lung involved?
No, so not FabiFlu. The only thing which I would probably be considering would be steroids if there is pneumonitis.
Okay. So basically you're looking at steroids rather than any antiviral. That's what the message is. Okay, next slide, please. I will just skip this because this is something again haywire and all across the thing. I think this is a very interesting data and all of us need to learn. A quick two-liner on D-dimer. If there is a D-dimer is raised, Dr. Amish, what do you do for your patient who is mildly symptomatic?
Nothing. D-dimer with comorbidities and increased risk of thromboembolism in general also. Then I would wait for 3-4 more days, repeat D-dimer, and then happily ask cardiologist and start on rivaroxaban or apixaban.
Dr. Udit, raised D-dimer, very high values, mildly symptomatic.
Very high value, I would start upfront with anticoagulation. If a borderline value, again repeated after 3 days. If it is rising, I would add anticoagulation.
Okay, Dr. Navneet, CT angio, do you ever perform it for any values of D-dimer?
No, so you have to remember solid tumor patients, especially lung adenocarcinomas, they are anyway at high risk for venous thromboembolism. This thing, but we don't do D-dimers routinely for them. So this is going to be largely based upon the clinical situation. So mildly symptomatic, I wouldn't do D-dimers.
So would you start them on LMW or some anticoagulants because they're highly prone for thromboembolic phenomena?
There is no data that COVID-19 patients who are mildly symptomatic should be given prophylactic anticoagulant.
Okay. So Dr. Nandita, last word from D-dimer's point of view. You look at severe patients, sick patients, so there you would be giving some amount of low fractionated low blood barrier.
Yes, we have in our we have cards suggesting which group of patients, what sort of anticoagulation needs of. This depends upon whether they are like, if you're suspecting VTE, then you might have to give therapeutic, but otherwise, most likely, depending on their weight, we give an intermediate dose for the severely critically ill patients, like less than 46 kg. We give deltaparin 2,500 or 5,000 units OD. And then according to the weight, like 46 to 100, which most of maybe Indian patients will be 5,000 BD or 10,000 units once a
When
day.
do you perform a CT angio? If I can ask you that question.
So if the patients, so when our patients are unstable, we cannot send them for CTPAs. So we then have to treat them and we do bedside echoes as well. But if the patients are stable, then we send them for CTPAs.
So
Dr.
all
Badira,
hospitalized patients should get low molecular weight heparin. Is that the consensus?
Sorry, what?
No.
Sorry, repeat it.
No, the consensus
all
is
hospitalized patients get prophylaxis?
Yes, they get only 5. All the hospitalized patients do get medical prophylaxis for us, but those patients who come to critical care, they will require slightly higher, the intermediate dose with severe ones. Yes.
there are two things here. All hospitalized cancer patients, per se, there are guidelines of giving a prophylaxis. That's something all of us know, especially abdominal malignancies. The recommendation is already there pre-COVID. For the COVID specific, the thing is that you only do it for moderate to severely ill patient. You do not do a prophylaxis on the mild and asymptomatic. That's what the guidelines are. Next, please. Next slide. Dr. Badira, any pediatric age group where you would look at and give a prophylaxis?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
Any pediatric patient group, any high profile of patients where you would like to do a prophylaxis for anticoagulation or something?
So only those who has some thrombotic tendency or thrombophilic patients who had past had something like that only, we do, otherwise no.
Okay, so I'm just cutting through this because this is something all of us know that. Next. Okay, D-dimer I'm going to skip. Next. There is some data that it predicts the severity of the COVID. There is also data that predicts the occurrence of pulmonary embolism if the values are very high. Next. And D-dimer could guide anticoagulation. There is also some data evolving, but nothing is a consensus. Next. Next. Yeah. Next. Next. Yeah. GCSF, last word. Maybe 2 minutes. Dr. Amish, you can take the discussion of GCSF for 2 to 3 minutes and then we can close.
No, I think we can start with pediatric and just one-liner answer because we are 2 minutes over short of the time.
Yeah.
So maybe Dr. Badira and then Dr. Navneet, two of them, and then you and me, Tarini, we can share our thought process.
Yeah,
and then we can conclude.
Yeah.
Dr.
So
Badira, do you give GCSF routinely in COVID-positive cancer patients?
You mean COVID-positive cancer patients? Okay.
No, even prophylactic GCSF. Let's do it.
In patients not COVID positive, right? Are we talking about?
Yeah.
No, he's talking about primary prophylaxis, right?
Okay, primary prophylaxis is normal population during this COVID pandemic.
Yes.
No.
Cancer patients, like for example, Hodgkin's or something, and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, CA breast, CA lung, depending on the protocol.
Yes. So if they are not COVID positive, otherwise during the pandemic, we have given primary prophylaxis, not to all. Hodgkin's we don't give, only for solid tumor patients who are on chemotherapy for bone soft tissue sarcomas. We are giving like a prophylaxis GCSF, peggrafil, so that we can cut down the neutropenic times and they don't come in between frequently. Otherwise, as a blanket for all, we are not giving. Hodgkin's we are not giving. Hematological malignancies except for AML in remission, we are not giving to all, or Burkitt's or DLBCL like that we are giving. Otherwise, not to all.
Okay.
And in solid tumors, yes, in many, but not all.
Right. So that would be the consensus across. So my question, Tarini, is Mayo Clinic and a few other guidelines, they mentioned that avoid GCSF.
Next slide, please.
Neutropenic patients, but COVID positive. Would you give GCSF with the fear of exciting or inciting cytokine storm in these COVID positive patients?
I was giving till recent times when this data has come in, and this data sometimes is scary. The more I read about it, I'm little more concerned about GCSF now. Dr. Navneet, actually, there was a discussion and he was a part of it 2 days back. And this is something which is there, and this is a paper on based on which the letter to editor was there, which is there. Dr. Navneet, do you feel that we need to cut short our prophylactic GCSF, especially in the COVID times?
I use very little prophylactic.
So do you think already who are using it, what do you recommend? They should be very cautious?
Yeah, so see, what is the aim? The aim is that patients who should not get severe COVID. And so one way of doing that is just reduce dose intensity, especially if your intent is palliative. Instead of giving 75 mg per meter square, give 70 mg per meter square of cisplatin or 65 mg per meter square and avoid GCSF. Just reduce the dose intensity. It's not going to make much of a difference.
Okay, next slide, please. Actually, this was the paper to letter to editor for the, and this paper really points out to that which I really didn't have time to discuss. Actually, 3 patients, both GCSF given, day 1 to day 3, all the 3 went into severe COVID sepsis. So that is the point where this things all got through. Actually, the initial part of COVID, all people are telling use more of GCSF because you would like to decrease the neutropenic episodes. Then with this, the thing is that there could be lot of things that neutrophilic infiltration happens in pulmonary capillaries. There's acute capillary with fibrin deposition, extravasation neutrophil. Lot of theories have come in, and now it is coming that probably we should be reducing and avoiding GCSF if at all we can do. Reduce your dose if in the palliative setting. In this curative setting, do not compromise on the dose. Use it with precautions. Try to take other things, but GCSF, there is no recommendation as such not to use it. The point that's coming in, please be very careful. Dr. Amish, your last word.
No, I agree. But remember, neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio has been right from COVID-19 days have been, prognosticating, and how much value do ICU people in intensive care give? I'm not very sure about it. So one thing, yes, try to use as less GCSF as possible, but also be judicious and use where you feel that it can save the neutropenic period to an expensive point. So do not give it off and do not use it very luxuriously.
Okay, I think we have answered this part of it. Be cautious. It was not as the initial part of COVID where GCSF actually advised by most of the bodies, actually societies actually recommended it. So now there's a concern, and we should be very cautious about GCSF. I think with that, I have nothing more to add, because we will be concluding this part of the meeting in the next, when we start off with what we really came to conclusions with. Dr. Amish, any words, and then we can go to Dr. Pulvesh.
I think let's go to Dr. Parekh for final concluding.
Thank you very much, Sau and Amish and all the panelists. This was a very exciting discussion. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide.
Is nothing, sir. It's very good.
So I had put some slides. Let me see if there are there.
Okay.
Can you go to the next? Keep on going till you see the next. So thanks very much. This is on 29th April, we will have a session which is going to primarily focus on vaccination for COVID-19 in cancer patients. So this is exceedingly important. Next slide. And we will have Dr. T. Raja moderating this. We have an expert panelist that includes Dr. Mukul Acharya from UK, Ullas Batra and Amit Agarwal from Delhi, Hemant Malhotra from Jaipur, Chetan Damne from Tata Hospital, and Rajesh Jindal from Kolkata, who has actually established a COVID vaccination center in his hospital. Next slide. And as usual, Sau and Amish will join me in becoming program coordinators. So we invite all of you to join us at 7:30 p.m. on 29th April, which is Thursday, 2 days from now.